The morning after their awkward misunderstanding, Jake found Zarathea waiting for him outside the healing center with what appeared to be a collection of crystalline tablets and bioluminescent drawing tools. Her skin patterns were calm and steady, but he could sense a nervous energy in the way she moved that suggested she had something important on her mind. When she spoke, her musical voice carried undertones that the translation device rendered as determination mixed with curiosity. "I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she said as Jake approached. "I realize that I know very little about true human customs, and you know equally little about Valerian ways of showing respect and gratitude. Perhaps we should teach each other properly so no more misunderstandings occur between our peoples." Jake felt relief that she seemed comfortable discussing what had happened and was eager to turn the experience into something positive. "That's an excellent idea. Understanding each other's cultures is just as important as solving your agricultural problems. How do you suggest we start?" Zarathea gestured to a quiet area near the healing center, where several low crystalline benches formed a circle around a small garden filled with glowing plants. "We can sit and share knowledge as equals. I will show you how Valerians express gratitude and friendship. You can show me how humans do the same. This way we both learn and neither feels embarrassed by ignorance." They settled onto the benches, and Jake was immediately struck by how different this conversation felt from their previous interactions. Before, they had always been focused on the urgent work of saving Valerian crops with little time for personal exchanges. Now, for the first time, they were simply two individuals from different worlds, trying to understand each other as people rather than as representatives of their species. "Among my people, gratitude is shown through what we call the harmony of acknowledgement," Zarathea began as her skin started to display slow shifting patterns of soft blue and green light. "When someone helps us or shows kindness, we create light, patterns that mirror their own emotional state. The harmony shows that we understand what they have given us and that we share their feelings." She demonstrated by focusing on Jake and allowing her skin patterns to shift into combinations that somehow felt warm and peaceful to watch. The colors flowed across her blue skin like gentle waves, and Jake found himself relaxing just from observing the display. There was something deeply calming about the way the lights moved and changed, as if they were responding to his own emotional state. "That's beautiful," Jake said honestly. "It's like you're sharing emotions directly instead of just talking about them. How do you learn to create the right patterns?" Zarathea's skin brightened with what Jake was learning to recognize as pleasure at his interest. "We begin learning as children by watching our parents and teachers. Each emotion has basic patterns, but every individual adds their own variations. When two Valerians create harmony together, the patterns become more complex and meaningful than either could make alone." Jake pulled out his tablet and showed Zarathea pictures he had brought from Earth, including photos of his family and friends. Humans show gratitude in many different ways, but most of them involve words or actions rather than physical changes. We might say thank you, or write a letter, or give a gift. Sometimes we hug or shake hands, but only with people we know well and trust. He scrolled through images of human social interactions, showing her pictures of graduation ceremonies, birthday parties, and family gatherings. Zarathea studied each image with intense concentration, asking questions about body language, facial expressions, and the meaning of various gestures. Her curiosity about human behavior was infectious, and Jake found himself explaining things he had never really thought about before. "Your face is changed to show emotions the way our skin patterns do," she observed as she examined a photo of Jake's sister Katie laughing at a birthday party. "But the changes are subtle, and I think I would have difficulty reading them correctly without practice." Jake laughed and realized she was absolutely right. Even humans sometimes have trouble reading each other's emotions correctly. That's why we've developed so many different ways to communicate how we feel. Words help, but they're not always enough either. As the morning progressed, they shared more about their respective cultures, and Jake began to understand how different Valerian society was from anything humans had experienced. The emphasis on harmony and shared emotional states created social bonds that were far deeper than most human relationships. At the same time, the rigid hierarchical structure seemed to limit individual expression in ways that would frustrate most humans. Your people seem to value individual achievement and personal choice very highly, Zerathia observed as Jake described human concepts of careers, marriage, and family planning. Among Valerians, the needs of the community always come before personal desires. This creates stability, but perhaps it also limits growth and change. Jake nodded thoughtfully as he considered the implications of what she was saying. Both approaches have advantages and disadvantages. Human individualism has led to great innovations and discoveries, but it has also created conflicts and inequality. Your community focus promotes cooperation, but might make it harder to adapt when circumstances change. Amy and Ryan found them still deep in conversation when they arrived to begin the day's work. Both humans were impressed by how much more comfortable Jake and Zerathia seemed with each other, and how naturally they were now communicating despite the language barriers and cultural differences. The awkwardness from the previous day had been replaced by genuine curiosity and mutual respect. "We've been learning about each other's ways of showing gratitude and friendship," Jake explained to his teammates. It turns out that most of Zerathia's knowledge about human customs came from entertainment broadcasts that gave her completely wrong ideas about how we actually behave. Amy laughed as she set up her equipment for another day of fungal research. That explains a lot. If aliens judge human culture based on our movies and television shows, they would think we spend all our time either fighting wars or falling in love with completely inappropriate people. The conversation gave Jake an idea that excited him more than any breakthrough in their agricultural research. "Zarathia, what if we create some kind of cultural exchange program between our peoples? Not just for scientists and diplomats, but for ordinary citizens who want to learn about each other's ways of life." Zarathia's skin patterns shifted to combinations Jake had never seen before as she considered the possibility. The council would need to approve such an arrangement, but I think many young Valerians would be eager to participate. We have grown curious about the star travelers and their different ways of thinking about problems. As they walked to the experimental growing areas, Jake felt a new sense of optimism about the relationship developing between humans and Valerians. The agricultural crisis had brought them together, but the cultural exchange they were beginning to create might prove even more valuable in the long term. Learning to understand each other as individuals rather than just as representatives of different species was opening possibilities that neither group had imagined when first contact was established. The day's research showed continued improvement. In the test plots where Earth fungi were being used to restore the damaged Valerian fungal networks. More importantly, Amy had begun to understand how to modify the treatment to work with the planet's unique electromagnetic environment. The solution was becoming clearer, but Jake realized that implementing it would require the kind of cooperation between species that could only come from genuine trust and understanding. "Tomorrow we will present our findings to the full council," Zarathia said as they finished documenting the day's progress. "But I think what we have learned about friendship between our peoples may be just as important as what we have discovered about healing our crops." Jake agreed completely as he watched her create a harmony pattern on her skin that seemed to capture the warmth and satisfaction of a day spent in productive collaboration. Understanding each other as people rather than aliens was proving to be the foundation for everything else they hoped to accomplish together. 3 days of intensive work had passed since the council meeting, and Jake found himself covered in alien soil as he knelt beside Amy in one of the experimental growing areas. They had been testing different combinations of Earth fungal samples with Valerian plants, and the results were more promising than either of them had dared to hope. The small section they were working in showed the first signs of recovery that any Valerian had seen in over a year. Amy carefully applied a mixture of Earth mycorrhizal fungi to the root systems of diseased Valerian food plants while Jake recorded data on his tablet. The fungi came from samples they had brought from Earth specifically for this type of research, but neither of them had expected it to work so well with completely alien plant biology. The symbiotic relationship that was forming between Earth organisms and Valerian crops was unlike anything in the scientific literature. "Look at this, Jake," Amy said with excitement, as she pointed to a plant whose bioluminescent glow had been flickering weakly for weeks. "The light patterns are stabilizing and becoming stronger. The Earth fungi are somehow bridging the gap between the plant and the damaged Valerian fungal network." Zarathea watched from nearby with her skin patterns shifting rapidly through different colors and intensities. She had been working with the human team for days now and had proven to be an excellent student of both human science and her own people's traditional growing knowledge. Her enthusiasm for learning was infectious, and Jake found himself looking forward to their daily conversations about the differences between human and Valerian approaches to agriculture. "The council will want to see this progress immediately," Zarathea said, as she examined the recovering plants with obvious wonder. "Many of our people have begun to lose hope that the growing darkness could be stopped. This proof that healing is possible will bring joy to hearts that have been heavy with fear." Jake stood up and brushed the alien soil from his hands while looking around at the experimental plots they had established. The work was proceeding faster than anyone had expected, but they still needed to prove that the solution could be scaled up to save entire agricultural districts. More importantly, they needed to understand why the original Valerian fungal networks had failed so they could prevent the problem from happening again. The afternoon brought Kefdar and several other council members to observe their progress firsthand. The elder Valerians moved through the experimental growing areas with careful deliberation, examining each test plot and asking detailed questions about the human techniques being employed. Their skin patterns remained subdued, but Jake could sense growing excitement in their musical voices. "This work you do brings hope where there was only despair," Kefdar said, as he studied a section where Earth fungi had completely restored the bioluminescent glow to dying plants. "But we must understand how our own deep-root networks failed before we can trust in lasting solutions." Amy had been working on that exact question, and she gathered the council members around a soil analysis station she had set up using both human and Valerian equipment. "From what I can determine, your original fungal networks were disrupted by changes in the electromagnetic patterns that flow through your planet's crust. Something altered the electrical environment that your symbiotic organisms depend on." Zarathea translated Amy's explanation into more traditional Valerian concepts, and Jake watched the council members' reactions with interest. Their skin patterns began to shift in ways he had not seen before, and several of them spoke rapidly among themselves in harmonic combinations that Ryan's translation equipment could not follow. They speak of the great disruption that occurred during the time when the darkness first appeared, Zarathea explained to the humans. Changes in the flow of deep earth energies that affected crystal growth and energy channeling throughout our civilization. Perhaps the same forces that brought gifts to our cities brought death to our growing places. The implications of this revelation sent Jake's mind racing through possibilities he had not considered before. If the Valerians had somehow altered their planet's electromagnetic environment to improve their technology, it could have had unintended consequences for the delicate biological networks that supported their agriculture. The solution might require balancing technological progress with environmental protection in ways that neither species had fully mastered. As the council members departed to consider these new insights, Jake found himself alone with Zarathea for the first time since their work had begun. She had been in constant presence during their research, but always as part of a larger group focused on the technical challenges they faced. Now, in the quiet of the experimental growing area, Jake began to see her as an individual rather than just a helpful alien guide. "You have given up much of your time to help us," Jake said as they cleaned and stored equipment for the night. "This work must be keeping you from other duties that are important to your people." Zarathea's skin patterns shifted to colors Jake was learning to associate with what humans might call embarrassment or shyness. "I am honored to work with beings who travel between stars to help those in need. Your knowledge and your willingness to share it freely shows a generosity that moves my spirit. Among my people, such gifts would require great ceremony to properly acknowledge. Something in her tone made Jake look up from the equipment he was packing. Zarathea stood very still, with her skin cycling through patterns that seemed to indicate internal conflict or uncertainty. When she spoke again, her voice carried harmonics that Ryan's translation device rendered as deep emotion. I have studied your people's ways through the transmissions we received before your arrival, she said slowly, as if choosing each word carefully. I learned of your customs for showing gratitude and respect between individuals. I wish to honor you properly for what you have done for my people. Jake felt a growing sense that something important was happening, but he was not sure what Zarathea was trying to communicate. Your friendship and help with our research is more than enough, thanks, he said gently. Working together like this is what makes the effort worthwhile. But Zarathea was not listening to his response. Instead, she had begun to unfasten the flowing robe she wore with careful, deliberate movements that suggested this was some kind of formal procedure. Jake realized with growing alarm that she was beginning to undress, and he had no idea why or how to respond appropriately. Zarathea, wait, Jake said as he stepped toward her with his hands raised in what he hoped was a calming gesture. I don't understand what you're doing. She paused in her movements and looked at him with her large dark eyes that reflected confusion and uncertainty. The transmissions we studied showed that human women express deep gratitude to men who helped them by sharing their physical forms. I wish to thank you as your people would expect, but perhaps I misunderstood the customs. Jake felt a mixture of horror and sympathy as he realized what had happened. Somehow the Valerians had intercepted and misinterpreted human communications. That led them to believe physical intimacy was a standard form of expressing gratitude. The cultural misunderstanding was both innocent and potentially disastrous for relations between their species. No, Zarathea, that's not how it works, Jake said gently as he approached her slowly, with his hand still visible and non-threatening. The transmissions you saw were probably entertainment programs, not real examples of how humans behave. We don't express gratitude that way between friends. Relief and embarrassment warred across Zarathea's shifting skin patterns as she began to refasten her robes. I have made an error that brings shame to my understanding, she said with obvious distress. Please forgive my ignorance of your true customs. Jake felt his heart go out to this young alien who had been trying so hard to honor what she thought were human traditions. There's nothing to forgive, he said warmly. Cultural misunderstandings happen even between human groups who have known each other for centuries. The important thing is that we learn from each other and build real friendship based on understanding. As they finished securing the experimental area, Jake realized that this moment of confusion and awkwardness had actually brought them closer to genuine cross-cultural understanding. Zarathea's willingness to acknowledge her mistake and learn from it showed the same openness and curiosity that made her such an excellent research partner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had taught them both valuable lessons about the importance of clear communication between very different peoples. Jake woke to silence and realized the storm had finally passed during the night. Soft blue light filtered through the crystal walls of his chamber, and he could hear unfamiliar sounds from outside that he hoped were normal city noises rather than signs of trouble. The sleeping surface had molded itself perfectly to his body during the night, and he felt more rested than he had since leaving Earth orbit. Rising from the bioluminescent bed, Jake looked out through the transparent wall at the Valerian city. In daylight, Thamora was even more beautiful than it had appeared in the storm, with crystal spires catching and refracting the morning sun into rainbow patterns that danced across every surface. Valerians moved through the streets below in their flowing robes, and Jake could see that many of them carried tools or containers that glowed with the same energy as their buildings. A gentle chiming sound drew his attention, and he turned to see Zarathea approaching his chamber. She moved with the graceful stride that seemed natural to all Valerians, but there was something different about her this morning. Her skin patterns were more subdued than they had been the night before, And when she spoke, her musical voice carried undertones that the translation device rendered as concern. "Good morning, Jake Morrison," she said with what he was learning to recognize as a Valerian greeting gesture. "I hope your rest was peaceful and your body feels strong today. There are things I must show you that cannot wait for formal council meetings." Jake quickly dressed in his uniform and joined Amy and Ryan, who were already gathering their equipment. Amy looked excited as she packed her biological analysis tools while Ryan checked his translation devices and communication links with the horizon. All three humans had slept well in the adaptive chambers and felt ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. Zerathia led them from the healing center into the streets of Thamora, and Jake got his first clear look at Valerian society. In action, the aliens moved with purpose through their crystal city, but they also stopped frequently to touch plants or building surfaces in what appeared to be a form of communication. When two Valerians met, they would often place their hands together and their skin would create synchronized light patterns that lasted several seconds. "Your people seem very connected to everything around them," Amy observed as they walked past a group of Valerians who were tending the street plants that sparkled with electrical energy. "It's like your entire civilization is one living organism." Zerathia skin brightened at the comment, and she nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, you understand correctly. We are part of the great network that connects all life on our world. The plants give us energy and food. We give them care and guidance. The crystals channel power from storms and ground currents. All things work together for the benefit of all." They passed through several districts of the city, and Jake noticed that each area seemed to specialize in different activities. One section was filled with workshops where Valerians crafted tools and art from living crystal. Another appeared to be dedicated to learning, with young Valerians gathered around elder teachers who created complex light displays with their skin patterns. A third district was obviously focused on food production, with terraced gardens that climbed the sides of crystal buildings dot as they moved further from the city center. The signs of the agricultural crisis became more apparent. Plants that should have been glowing with health showed dark patches or flickered weakly. Some growing areas were completely dark and lifeless. Valerians worked frantically in these disease sections, using tools that pulsed with healing energy, but their efforts seemed to have little effect on whatever was killing their crops. "This is where our troubles began," Zarathia explained as they reached a large agricultural complex on the outskirts of the city. 6 seasons ago, our food plants started losing their connection to the energy network. At first, we thought it was a natural cycle that would correct itself, but the darkness has only spread. Amy immediately began taking samples from both healthy and diseased plants, while Ryan recorded everything with his equipment. Jake walked among the growing beds, trying to understand the scope of the problem. The affected areas seemed random at first, but as he studied the pattern, he began to see that the disease was spreading outward from specific points like infection centers. "Have you noticed that the darkness seems to start in certain locations and spread from there?" Jake asked Zerathia, who was watching. Amy worked with obvious fascination. The young Valerian's skin patterns shifted to what Jake was learning indicated. "Surprise! You see this pattern also. Our plant tenders have observed the same thing, but we cannot find what starts the darkness in those places. We have tested soil and water and energy flows, but everything appears normal until suddenly it is not." Amy looked up from her sample collection with excitement clear on her face. "Jake, I think I might know what's happening here. The healthy plants show signs of a symbiotic relationship with what appears to be a fungal network in the soil. The diseased plants have lost that symbiotic connection. If something is disrupting the fungal network, it could explain why entire sections are failing." Zerathia listened carefully as Ryan translated Amy's explanation. When she understood the concept, her entire body began to glow more brightly, and she spoke rapidly in her own language before switching back to translated words. "This makes sense to us. Our ancestors spoke of the deep roots that connected all growing things. We thought this was only poetry, but perhaps they meant something real that we have forgotten. They spent the morning examining disease growing areas throughout the agricultural district. Each site showed the same pattern of spreading failure. But Amy's analysis revealed that the fungal networks in the soil were indeed being disrupted by something the Valerians had never encountered before. The symbiotic organisms that should have been helping the plants access nutrients and energy were dying or disappearing entirely. By midday, Jake's team had enough data to begin forming theories about what might be causing the agricultural crisis. More importantly, they had begun to understand how Valerian farming worked and why it was so different from human agriculture. The plants were not just growing in soil, but were connected to a living network that shared resources and energy across vast distances. On Earth, we have similar fungal networks, but we are only beginning to understand how they work. Amy explained to Zarathea as they shared a meal in one of the city's communal eating areas. If we could somehow restore the connections between your plants and their fungal partners, it might stop the spreading darkness. Zarathea's response revealed more about Valerian society than Jake had learned from all their previous conversations. This knowledge you bring gives us hope, but also shows us how much we have lost. Our people once knew the deep secrets of growing things, but we became too focused on our crystal cities and energy networks. Perhaps we forgot to listen to the soil beneath our feet. The afternoon brought a formal meeting with the Council of Thamora, and Jake found himself in a vast crystal chamber where 12 elder Valerians sat in a circle that pulsed with synchronized light patterns. The council members were obviously ancient by Valerian standards, with skin that showed deep blue coloration and light patterns that moved slowly and deliberately. When they spoke together, their voices created harmonies that needed no translation to convey wisdom and authority. Kethar served as translator between the council and the human team, and Jake was impressed by how quickly the alien leaders grasped the implications of Amy's discoveries. They asked detailed questions about Earth's fungal networks and human farming techniques. Most importantly, they seemed willing to consider solutions that combine Valerian biotechnology with human agricultural knowledge. The council agrees to provide all resources needed for your research, Kethar announced after a long discussion among the elders. Zarathea will continue as your guide and will have access to our most advanced growing facilities. Time grows short, but hope grows stronger with your presence among us. As evening approached, Jake felt cautiously optimistic about their mission. They had identified the likely cause of the agricultural crisis, and the Valerians were eager to work with them on solutions. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that this crisis was forcing the Valerian people to rediscover knowledge and wisdom that their civilization had slowly forgotten. Working together might save not just their crops, but help them reconnect with the natural world that had once been the foundation of their society. The wind hit Jake like a physical blow as he stepped from the shuttle onto the alien soil of Kepler 442b. Rain that glowed faintly blue struck his face, and he could taste something metallic in the air that made his tongue tingle. The electromagnetic storm overhead created a light show unlike anything he had ever seen, with purple and green lightning dancing between crystalline spires that reached toward the turbulent sky. Through the driving rain, Jake could see 3 Valerian figures approaching the landing site. They moved with long, graceful strides that seemed unaffected by the howling wind. As they drew closer, Jake got his first good look at the species humanity had traveled so far to meet. The Valerians stood nearly 7 feet tall with elongated limbs that gave them an elegant appearance. Their skin was a pale blue color that seemed to shift and shimmer like water under moonlight. Most striking were their eyes, which were large and completely black, without any visible iris or pupil. The lead Valerian raised one long-fingered hand in what Jake hoped was a greeting gesture. When the alien spoke, its voice was musical with harmonics. That seemed to resonate in Jake's chest. Ryan Torres stepped forward with his translation device already working to decode the complex sounds. After a moment of processing, the device produced a mechanical approximation of English. "Welcome, human visitors. We greet you with hope in dark times." The translation came through Ryan's speakers. I am Keftar of the Third Circle, and I speak for the Council of Thamora. We are grateful you have traveled the void to reach us. Jake, step forward and try to match the Valerian's formal tone. I am Lieutenant Jake Morrison of the United Earth Space Command. We have come to learn about your situation and offer what help we can. My team includes Dr. Amy Foster, who studies plant life, and Ryan Torres, who helps us speak together. Keftar's skin seemed to brighten slightly at Jake's words, and the alien gestured toward a series of crystalline structures in the distance. You must come quickly to shelter. The storm grows worse and travel becomes dangerous soon. We have prepared a place for you in the healing chambers where you will be safe and comfortable. The group began moving across the landing area toward what Jake assumed was the Valerian city. The ground beneath their feet was covered in a moss, like plant that glowed softly even in the dim storm light. Amy knelt quickly to take a sample while trying to keep her equipment dry. As they walked, Jake noticed that the crystalline formations around them were not just decorative, but seemed to channel and focus the electrical energy from the storm overhead. Fascinating, Amy called over the wind as she rejoined the group. The ground covering is definitely photosynthetic, but it's also conducting electrical current. The entire landscape is like a living power grid that feeds energy to the plants and buildings. The Valerian city of Thamora rose before them like something from a dream. Spires of living crystal twisted skyward in spirals that defy human understanding of architecture. The buildings seemed to grow from the ground rather than being constructed, and they pulsed with the same bioluminescent energy that Jake had seen the ground covering. Windows were not cut into the structures, but formed naturally as transparent sections in the crystal walls. As they approached the outskirts of the city, Jake could see more Valerians moving between the buildings. They wore flowing robes that seemed to be made from the same light-conducting material as the plants, and their movements had a fluid quality that reminded him of dancers. Despite the storm, many of them stopped to watch the human visitors pass, and Jake could see their skin patterns shifting in what he hoped was curiosity rather than hostility. Keftar led them to a low crystalline building that hummed with energy. This is a healing place where our injured recover and our sick find peace. You will be guests here while we prepare for formal meetings with the council. Food will be brought and rest spaces prepared according to your needs. The interior of the building was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The walls were transparent crystal that revealed a complex network of energy flowing through the structure like a circulatory system. The floor was soft and warm under their feet and seemed to adjust its firmness as they walked. Furniture grew from the floor in organic shapes that looked more grown than built. A younger Valerian approached from deeper in the building, and Jake was struck by how different she looked from Keftar. Where the older alien was formal and reserved, this one moved with obvious excitement. Her skin patterns were more active, shifting through different colors and intensities as she walked. She wore simpler robes than Keftar and carried what appeared to be medical equipment made from the same bioluminescent materials as everything else in their civilization. This is Zerathia of the First Learning, Keftar said, with what might have been affection in his musical voice. She is our most skilled young healer and has volunteered to care for your needs while you remain with us. She has studied your transmissions and believes she understands some human requirements. Zerathia stepped forward and attempted what Jake recognized as a human-style bow. When she spoke, her voice had the same musical quality as Keftar, but with lighter tones that reminded Jake somehow of laughter. The translation device worked for a moment before producing her words in English. Welcome, brave travelers from the star called Sol. I am honored to serve as your guide in this place. I have prepared spaces for your rest and food that should not harm your different bodies. Jake found himself smiling at her enthusiasm despite the serious nature of their mission. Thank you, Zerathia. We are grateful for your hospitality and look forward to learning about your people and your world. Keftar exchanged what appeared to be formal farewells with the humans and departed into the storm, leaving them in Zerathia's care. She immediately began showing them to the healing center, pointing out features and explaining how various systems worked. Her knowledge of human physiology was impressive, and Jake realized she had spent considerable time preparing for their visit. Your bodies produce heat differently than ours, she explained, as she adjusted environmental controls in their assigned spaces. I have modified these chambers to maintain temperatures that should feel comfortable to you. The sleeping surfaces will support your bone structure, and the air mixture has been adjusted for your breathing needs. Amy was fascinated by the medical equipment Zerathia showed them. Everything here is biological rather than mechanical. The diagnostic tools are actually living organisms that can sense disease and injury. It's like they've created a symbiotic relationship between their technology and their biology. As evening fell, the storm outside seemed to intensify rather than diminish. Through the crystal walls, they could see lightning strikes hitting the Tessur, city spires, and being channeled down into the energy distribution network. The entire city pulsed with captured power, and Jake began to understand how the Valerians had built their civilization around working with natural forces rather than fighting against them. Zerathia brought them food that was surprisingly familiar despite its alien origin. Fruits that tasted like a combination of apple and honey. Grains that reminded Jake of rice but with a nutty flavor. Vegetables that glowed softly on the plate but tasted like the best salad he had ever eaten. She watched carefully as they ate, to make sure the food agreed with their human digestive systems. Tomorrow, when the storm passes, we will show you the affected growing areas, Zarathia said as they finished their meal. The Council hopes your different way of thinking might see solutions that we have missed. Many depend on your success. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility as he prepared for sleep in his crystal chamber. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the healing center all was peaceful and warm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the real work would begin, but tonight he allowed himself to hope that they might actually be able to help save an entire civilization from starvation. Jake Morrison adjusted his uniform collar as he stared through the viewport of the UE horizon at the blue and green planet below. Kepler 442b looked almost like Earth from this distance, but Jake knew better than to trust appearances in space. 3 years of diplomatic missions had taught him that what looked familiar could be the most dangerous thing of all. Final briefing in 10 minutes, Lieutenant, called Captain Lisa Carter from across the bridge. Her voice carried the weight of command that Jake had learned to respect during their 6-month journey to this distant world. Lisa had been chosen to lead this mission because she understood both military strategy and delicate negotiations. The Valerian species had made first contact with humanity 8 months ago through long-range transmissions, and their message had been simple but desperate. Jake walked toward the briefing room where his small team waited. Dr. Amy Foster sat reviewing her xenobiology notes for what must have been the 100th time since they left Earth. Her expertise in alien plant life would be crucial for this mission. Ryan Torres was calibrating his translation equipment and running diagnostics on the communication arrays. Without Ryan, they would be flying blind into a world where misunderstanding could mean war or worse. The briefing room door slid shut behind Jake as he took his seat. Lisa activated the holographic display, showing detailed scans of the Valerian homeworld. The planet was slightly larger than Earth, with 2 small moons and a climate that seemed almost tropical across most continents. What made it special was the abundance of crystalline formations that jutted from the surface like frozen lightning. The Valerians have been clear about their situation. Lisa began pointing to several dark patches on the planetary surface. Their food crops are dying from some kind of plague that their biotechnology cannot cure. They estimate they have less than 2 years before widespread famine begins. They reached out to us because they intercepted some of our agricultural broadcasts and believe human farming techniques might help. Amy leaned forward, studying the diseased areas on the display. Their plant biology is carbon-based like ours, but they use a form of bioluminescent photosynthesis that we have never seen before. The plants actually glow at night and draw energy from their planet's magnetic field as well as their sun. If something is disrupting that process, it could explain why their crops are failing. Ryan checked his equipment again and looked up at the team. Their language is complex with multiple harmonic layers. They communicate through sound waves, but also through changes in their skin pigmentation. I have built translation protocols based on their transmissions, but we will be learning as we go. One wrong word could create a diplomatic disaster. Jake nodded and stood up to address his team. Our mission is simple but not easy. We establish peaceful contact with the Valerian. Leadership. We assess their agricultural crisis and determine if human knowledge can help. We do not make promises we cannot keep, and we do not interfere with their internal politics. This is about saving lives, not changing their civilization. Lisa powered down the display and walked to the viewport. The Valerians have designated a landing site near their capital city of Thamora. Intelligence suggests their society is hierarchical, with strict social rules that we do not fully understand yet. They have agreed to provide safe passage for our shuttle, but weather patterns on the surface are unpredictable. Jake, you will lead the ground team while I maintain orbit and coordinate with Earth Command. The next few hours passed quickly as the team prepared their equipment and ran through emergency procedures. Jake packed light, knowing that they might need to move quickly if things went wrong. His sidearm remained holstered but ready, and he carried medical supplies that could help both humans and potentially Valerian physiology. D.R. Foster loaded her biological analysis tools in sample containers while Ryan packed enough communication equipment to establish a permanent link with the horizon. If needed, as they approached the shuttle bay, Jake felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that came before every first contact mission. Humanity had made peaceful contact with 12 alien species in the past decade, but each encounter brought new challenges and new ways that things could go catastrophically wrong. The Valerians seemed genuinely interested in cooperation, but Jake knew that desperation could make even peaceful species unpredictable. The shuttle, Meridian, sat ready in the bay with its pilot Marcus Chun running pre-flight checks. Marcus had flown diplomatic missions to 4 other worlds, and his steady hands had gotten Jake out of trouble more than once. Weather looks rough down there, Lieutenant, Marcus called as the team boarded. Electrical storms across 3 continents, and wind speeds that would ground civilian aircraft on Earth. The Valerians warned us about storm season, but this looks worse than their projections. Jake strapped himself into his seat as Amy and Ryan secured their equipment. Through the small viewport, he could see the surface of Kepler 442b growing larger as they descended through the atmosphere. The crystalline formations became more visible, and Jake realized they were not random geological features, but carefully cultivated structures that seemed to channel the planet's electrical activity. The Valerians had built their civilization around harnessing natural forces in ways that human science was only beginning to understand. Entering the storm system now, Marcus announced as turbulence began to shake the shuttle. Lightning flashed outside in colors Jake had never seen before, and the electromagnetic interference made their instruments flicker and spark. Ryan worked frantically to maintain communication with the horizon, while Amy monitored atmospheric conditions that changed by the second. The landing site appeared through the storm, clouds as a series of glowing markers arranged in a perfect circle. Valerian architecture was visible in the distance, with spiral-like buildings that twisted toward the sky like living crystal. Jake could see movement around the landing area and realized that despite the dangerous weather, the Valerians had come to greet them. Their dedication to this meeting impressed him and reinforced his determination to make this mission succeed. Taking her down, Marcus called as he fought the controls against wind shear that would have destroyed a less sturdy vessel. The shuttle touched down hard but safely inside the designated area, and Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Everything that happened next would determine whether 2 species could work together to save lives or whether fear and misunderstanding would doom the Valerians to starvation. Through the viewport, Jake could see tall blue-skinned figures approaching. Through the storm, they moved with grace despite the howling wind and wore robes that seemed to glow with the same bioluminescent properties as their dying crops. The Valerians had risked their own safety to welcome the humans, and Jake knew that this gesture of trust must be honored. "Remember our protocols," Jake said to his team as they prepared to disembark. "We observe before we act. We listen before we speak. We respect their customs even when we do not understand them. These people have asked for our help, and we will not let them down." The shuttle door opened, and Jake Morrison stepped onto an alien world carrying the hopes of two species and the weight of a mission that could change the course of both their civilizations. The storm raged around them, but Jake felt a moment of calm certainty that this was exactly where he needed to be.